Security, remove this disruption permanently.
The $15,000 seat meant nothing now. Damon Richardson was being dragged down the aisle of Pinnacle Airlines Flight 847 like a common criminal, his Tom Ford suit jacket torn at the shoulder seam. The Italian wool fabric, worth more than most people's monthly salary, hung in shreds as Airport Security Officer Miguel Santos gripped his arm with unnecessary force. The first-class cabin erupted in chaos. Passengers fumbled for their phones, the soft glow of recording lights creating a constellation of witnesses. In seat 3B, tech journalist Jake Morrison held his device steady, live streaming to 50,000 followers who were about to witness something that would reshape the aviation industry forever. "This is happening right now," Jake whispered into his phone, his voice barely audible over the commotion. "A passenger is being physically removed from first class for no apparent reason." Victoria Ashworth stood at the galley entrance, her perfectly manicured hand gripping the brass service cart handle. She was stunning in that untouchable way that opened doors and closed opportunities for others. Her blonde hair was pulled into an elegant chignon, not a strand out of place despite the chaos she had orchestrated. The tailored Pinnacle Airlines uniform, modified to accentuate her figure, gave her an air of authority she wielded like a weapon. She watched Damon's removal with the satisfaction of someone who believed they had just solved a problem. Her blue eyes, cold as winter steel, showed no trace of doubt or empathy. This was power. This was control. This was exactly how her world was supposed to work. "Ma'am, please," came a voice from behind the service cart. Isabella Rodriguez, a junior flight attendant with kind eyes and trembling hands, stepped forward. I checked his boarding pass. "It's legitimate. Seat 1A, paid in full." Victoria turned her glacial stare toward the younger woman. "Isabella, return to your station. I'm handling this situation." But he wasn't causing any trouble. He was just sitting there reading. He was disrupting the comfort of our premium passengers. Victoria replied, her voice carrying the authority of 15 years with Pinnacle Airlines and a Stanford MBA that she mentioned in every conversation. "Mr. Whitmore has priority status." Chase Whitmore, 28 years old and worth nothing he hadn't inherited, lounged in seat 2A with a champagne flute in his hand. His designer tracksuit, worth more than most people's cars, was wrinkled from his hurried arrival. He had the soft features of someone who had never faced real adversity, never been told no by anyone who mattered. Finally, Chase said, raising his glass in mock celebration, "Some actual customer service. I was starting to think this airline had forgotten how to treat VIP passengers." Damon's dark eyes found Chase's through the chaos. Even with his hands restrained behind his back, even with his dignity under assault, there was something unsettling about his calm. It wasn't submission. It wasn't defeat. It was the quiet stillness that comes before an earthquake. "You have no idea what you just started," Damon said, his voice carrying despite its measured tone. The words weren't a threat. They were a promise. Officer Santos jerked him forward. "Save it for the station, buddy." In 30 seconds, they would learn why removing Damon Richardson from seat 1A was a $3.2 billion mistake. But those 30 seconds felt like hours as the Boeing 777 became a pressure cooker of tension, privilege, and consequences that none of them could imagine. The passengers in first class sat frozen, their expensive meals forgotten, their important business calls abandoned. They were about to witness something that would be talked about in boardrooms and courtrooms for years to come. Victoria smoothed her skirt and checked her reflection in the galley mirror. Everything was perfect. Everything was under control. She had no idea that in 6 hours she would own nothing but unemployment and shame. Chase finished his champagne and signaled for another. He had no idea that his trust fund was about to become a legal battlefield. Officer Santos tightened his grip on Damon's wrist. He had no idea that his career was ending with each step toward the aircraft door. and Damon Richardson, CEO of Richardson Dynamics, builder of technological empires, and the man who never forgot. A slight said nothing more as they dragged him into a future that would change everything. The plane's engines hummed with potential energy, just like the revolution that was about to begin. 2 hours earlier, Terminal 4 at Los Angeles International Airport buzzed with the typical Tuesday afternoon energy. Business travelers rushed between gates, their phones pressed to their ears, their importance worn like expensive cologne. The air conditioning fought a losing battle against the California sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Damon Richardson moved through the chaos like a current of calm water. At 45, he possessed the kind of quiet confidence that came from building something from nothing and watching it grow into everything. His 6-foot frame carried the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin, whether he was wearing a $1,500 suit or the jeans and hoodie he preferred during late-night coding sessions. He approached the Pinnacle Airlines first-class check-in counter with unhurried steps. The gate agent, Elena Vasquez, looked up from her computer screen and smiled. She had worked for Pinnacle for 8 years and had developed an eye for reading passengers. This man was different. No entourage, no attitude, no desperate need to announce his importance. "Good afternoon, sir. Checking in for Flight 847. Damon placed his phone and a black American Express Centurion card on the counter. "Damon Richardson, Seat 1A. Elena's fingers flew across her keyboard. The booking details appeared on her screen and her eyebrows rose slightly. Full fare, flexible first-class ticket. No upgrades, no points, no corporate discounts. Someone had paid $15,847 for a 6-hour flight to New York. "Everything looks perfect, Mr. Richardson. Your boarding pass." She handed him the slim cardstock that represented more money than most people spent on their cars. Damon tucked it into his jacket pocket without looking at it. "Thank you. Are you traveling for business or pleasure?" "Business," he said simply. What he didn't mention was that the business involved finalizing the acquisition of a logistics company that would revolutionize supply chain management across 3 continents. What he didn't say was that the documents in his briefcase represented 18 months of negotiations worth $800 million. People never asked the right questions anyway. Elena watched him walk toward the security line with the measured pace of someone who had learned that the world would wait for him, not the other way around. She had no idea she had just checked in one of the most powerful men in technology, someone whose company's algorithms powered half the internet, and whose investment decisions could make or break entire industries. Damon had started Richardson Dynamics in his garage 12 years ago with $15,000, a laptop held together with electrical tape, and an idea that everyone said would never work. He had faced rejection from 47 venture capital firms, been turned down for loans by every bank in Silicon Valley, and been told by industry experts that a black man from East Oakland would never build anything significant in tech. They had been wrong about everything. Richardson Dynamics now employed 38,000 people across 6 continents. Their cloud computing platform processed 40% of global e-commerce transactions. Their artificial intelligence division had 12 patents that would define the next decade of machine learning. But Damon still remembered what it felt like to be underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked because people saw his skin color before they saw his mind. He remembered every slight, every closed door, every conversation that ended when someone realized he wasn't the assistant or the delivery person. He remembered because memory was fuel and fuel was power. After clearing security, Damon made his way to the Pinnacle Airlines Admirals Club. The lounge was designed to impress with its marble floors, leather furniture, and panoramic views of the tarmac. Business executives sat hunched over laptops, their faces illuminated by screens showing stock prices and meeting schedules. Damon found a quiet corner and opened his briefcase. Inside was his laptop, a Patek Philippe watch he wore only for important meetings, and a folder containing documents that would reshape the logistics industry. He also carried something most people wouldn't notice, a Mont Blanc pen that had belonged to his grandfather. A man who had worked 3 jobs to send his children to college and never lived to see his grandson become one of the most influential people in America. He checked his phone. A text from his assistant board meeting moved to Thursday. Acquisition team ready for your signature. Another text from his lawyer, Pinnacle Airline stock at $47 per share. Still interested in the aviation sector, Damon had been watching Pinnacle for months. Their customer service ratings were declining, their employee satisfaction surveys showed concerning patterns, and their stock price reflected a company struggling with both profitability and reputation management. He saw potential in their route network and infrastructure, but not in their leadership. He typed back, "Keep monitoring. May have an opportunity soon." He had no idea how prophetic that message would prove to be. At 1:45 p.m. boarding began for Flight 847. Damon gathered his things and walked to the gate. The aircraft was a Boeing 777-300ER, one of Pinnacle's newer planes with the airline's signature navy blue and silver livery gleaming under the afternoon sun. The gate agent scanned his boarding pass and smiled. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Richardson. You're in seat 1A today. Thank you." He walked down the jet bridge, past the economy passengers waiting in line, past the families with strollers and business travelers checking their phones. The first-class cabin welcomed him with warm lighting, leather seats, and the quiet efficiency of a well-designed space. Seat 1A was exactly where he wanted to be, front row window side, with enough room to work and privacy to think. He stowed his briefcase in the overhead compartment and settled into the wide leather seat. The cabin was filling slowly, passengers finding their places in the hierarchy of commercial aviation. He opened his laptop and began reviewing the final details of the logistics acquisition. The numbers were beautiful revenue projections, market penetration analysis, integration timelines. Everything was perfect, ready for his signature, and $800 million in funding. At 2:10 p.m., just 5 minutes before scheduled departure, he heard a commotion near the aircraft door. Someone was arguing with the flight crew. Someone was about to change everything. "Excuse me, buddy. You're in my seat." The voice carried across the first-class cabin like fingernails on expensive leather. Damon looked up from his laptop to see Chase Whitmore standing in the aisle, designer tracksuit, wrinkled champagne flute, half-empty attitude fully loaded. Chase was the kind of person who had never learned to speak quietly because he had never been in a situation where anyone might tell him to lower his voice. At 28, he had the soft features of inherited wealth and the entitled posture of someone who had never been denied anything that mattered to him. His father, Archibald Whitmore III, owned 12% of Pinnacle Airline stock and served on the board of directors. Chase flew Pinnacle exclusively, not out of loyalty, but because his family's influence guaranteed him special treatment on every flight. He expected that influence to extend to every aspect of his experience, including seat selection. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Damon replied without looking up from his screen. His voice was calm, professional, the tone of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult people in high-stakes negotiations. Chase stepped closer, invasion of personal space being one of his favorite power tactics. "No misunderstanding, pal. I always sit in 1A. It's my seat. Has been for 3 years. This is seat 1A, Damon said, finally closing his laptop and giving Chase his full attention. "My boarding pass confirms it. Perhaps you'd like to check with the crew about your seating assignment." The exchange was drawing attention from other first-class passengers. In seat 2B, Patricia Kellner, a federal appellate judge, looked up from her legal briefs. In seat 3A, David Park, a CNN correspondent, reached for his phone. In seat 4B, Margaret Foster, a retired State Department official, watched with the keen interest of someone who had seen power struggles in much more serious contexts. Chase laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Listen, I don't know how you managed to sneak up here or who you bribed at the gate, but this is how it works. I'm a Platinum Elite member. My father is deeply connected with the board of this airline. That seat belongs to me. I paid full price for this seat, Mr. Whitmore. $15,847 to be exact. I have the receipt if you'd like to see it." The number hung in the air like a challenge. $15,000 was more than Chase spent on a weekend shopping trip, but it was real money, the kind that demanded respect and consideration. "I don't care what you paid," Chase said, his voice rising. "I want this seat. Move back to economy where you belong." The silence that followed was electric. Every passenger in first class understood exactly what Chase meant by "where you belong," and the implications settled over the cabin like smoke from a fire that was about to rage out of control. Damon's jaw tightened, but he remained seated. His hands rested calmly on his laptop case, but there was something in his dark eyes that suggested Chase was playing a game with rules he didn't understand. "Then I suggest you take it up with the staff," Damon said evenly. "I am not moving." Chase's face flushed red with the kind of anger that comes from being told no by someone he considered inferior. He snapped his fingers, a sound that carried all the arrogance of someone who had never learned to ask for anything politely. Flight attendant, flight attendant. Victoria Ashworth emerged from the galley like a swan rising from dark water. At 38, she was stunning in a way that opened doors and closed conversations. Her blonde hair was styled in a perfect chignon. Her makeup was flawless, despite the stress of pre-flight preparations, and her tailored uniform accentuated every curve while maintaining professional authority. She had been watching the interaction from the galley, already forming opinions based on appearance rather than facts. The quiet black man in the expensive suit looked like an upgrade, a lucky break, or an employee flying on a company pass. The young white man in the designer tracksuit looked like money influence and the kind of passenger who could make or break a flight attendant's performance review. "Is there a problem, Mr. Whitmore?" Victoria asked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She knew Chase well. He was a difficult passenger who complained about everything from the champagne selection to the temperature of the towels, but his family's influence made him untouchable. "This guy's in my seat," Chase said, gesturing wildly at Damon. "I want him gone. Now. My back hurts and I need the extra legroom of the bulkhead." Victoria turned her gaze to Damon, and the sweetness vanished like sugar dissolving in acid. Her blue eyes became cold, calculating, measuring him against her own biases and finding him lacking. "Sir, I'm going to have to see your boarding pass again." Damon sighed and reached into his jacket pocket. He handed her the boarding pass without a word, watching her face as she scanned the details. He could see the moment she processed the information: legitimate ticket, seat 1A, full fare paid. Her eyes narrowed as she looked from the pass to Damon to Chase, making a calculation that had nothing to do with airline policy and everything to do with power dynamics. The boarding pass was legitimate, the seat assignment was correct, the payment was verified. But Victoria saw Preston Montgomery's father's influence, his family's board position, and his history of making life difficult for crew members who didn't accommodate his demands. In her biased estimation, the quiet black man in the suit was expendable. The loud air in the tracksuit was not. Sir Victoria said, handing the pass back to Damon, but holding on to the edge of it for a moment longer than necessary. "There seems to be a double booking error in our computer system. Mr. Whitmore has priority status with our airline. I'm going to have to ask you to move." Move where Damon asked, his voice steady, but with an edge that suggested he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. "We have a seat available in premium economy, row 22. It has adequate legroom and complimentary beverages." A collective gasp rippled through the first-class cabin. To ask a confirmed first-class passenger to move to row 22 was more than an inconvenience. It was an insult of the highest order. Judge Kellner lowered her reading glasses. David Park started recording discreetly. Margaret Foster leaned forward, her diplomatic instincts, sensing a situation spiraling toward international incident territory. Damon looked at Victoria with the kind of steady gaze that made adversaries in boardrooms reconsider their negotiation strategies. Let me understand this correctly. You want me to give up the seat I paid $15,000 for to accommodate a man who arrived late simply because he has status, and you want to downgrade me to row 22 without compensation. We will offer you a voucher for $75 off your next flight, Victoria said dismissively as if she were doing him a tremendous favor. Now please gather your things. We are delaying takeoff, and that affects all our passengers. No, Damon said. The cabin went completely silent. Even the ambient noise of the aircraft systems seemed to quiet, as if the plane itself was holding its breath. Chase's eyes bulged. "Excuse me, I said no," Damon repeated, leaning back in his seat and crossing his legs. "I have a valid contract of carriage. I am seated in my assigned seat. I am not causing a disturbance, and I am not moving." Victoria's face hardened into a mask of fury. She was accustomed to passengers who might complain but ultimately complied when faced with crew authority. She had never encountered someone who simply refused to acknowledge her power. "Sir, if you do not comply with crew instructions, that is a federal offense. I can have you removed from this aircraft." "Then you better call the captain," Damon said, reaching for his phone. "Because the only way I am leaving this seat is if you drag me out. And I promise you, Victoria," he read her name tag deliberately, "if you escalate this situation, you will regret it for the rest of your career." Victoria stiffened as if she had been slapped. No passenger had ever spoken to her with such quiet authority, such complete lack of deference to her position. For a moment her confidence wavered, but then she remembered who she was, where she was, and who was watching. She leaned down, whispering harshly so only Damon could hear. "Listen to me carefully. People like you think you can buy your way into spaces where you aren't wanted. You're disrupting the comfort of our actual VIP passengers. Now get up, or I will call security, and they will remove you in handcuffs. People like me." Damon asked, a dangerous glint appearing in his dark eyes. "And who exactly are people like me, Victoria, troublemakers?" She spat loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "Passengers who don't understand their place." The words hung in the cabin air like poison gas. Everyone understood the subtext, the coded language, the barely concealed prejudice wrapped in airline policy. Victoria turned on her designer heel and marched toward the cockpit, her spine rigid with righteous anger. She was going to end this situation once and for all. Chase smirked and leaned down toward Damon, his breath reeking of champagne and entitlement. "You're finished, buddy. You should have just walked back to cattle class while you had the chance. Now you're going to jail." Damon didn't respond immediately. He unlocked his phone and opened a secure messaging app, his fingers moving with the precision of someone who had built an empire through strategic communication. He typed a single message to a contact saved simply as "Arthur, prepare acquisition documentation for Pinnacle Airlines. I may be in the market for a new investment." He hit send just as the cockpit door opened and Victoria returned, but she wasn't alone. Behind her was Captain Robert Hayes, a weary-looking man whose 20-year career had taught him to support his crew first and ask questions later. Flanking him were two airport authority officers who had just boarded from the jet bridge. Officer Miguel Santos, a 10-year veteran who saw compliance as a nail and his authority as a hammer, and Officer James Mitchell, a younger man who followed Santos's lead without question. "That's him." Victoria pointed her finger, trembling with self-righteous anger. "He's belligerent, refusing lawful orders and threatening crew members." Officer Santos stepped forward without asking for Damon's side of the story. He saw a black man in a suit refusing to obey a white flight attendant, and his training, his biases, and his assumptions made the decision for him. "Sir, you need to grab your belongings and come with us," Santos barked. "Now." "I have done nothing wrong," Damon said, his hands clearly visible on his laptop case to show he posed no threat. "I have a legitimate ticket for this seat. This woman is discriminating against me to favor another passenger." "I don't care about your ticket," Santos said, reaching for his handcuffs. The crew wants you off this plane. That means you're trespassing. Stand up. I'm warning you." Damon said, his voice carrying a weight that made several passengers lean forward. "You have 30 seconds to verify my identity and understand what you're about to do. After that, the consequences will be permanent." But Santos had already made his decision, and in the world of airport security, 30 seconds might as well have been 30 years. "Step away from your seat, sir. Final warning." Officer Miguel Santos had his handcuffs ready, the metal gleaming under the cabin's soft lighting. His partner, Officer James Mitchell, flanked Damon's right side, effectively boxing him into seat 1A. The message was clear compliance or force. Victoria Ashworth stood behind the officers, her arms crossed, radiating the satisfaction of someone who believed she had just restored order to her domain. Her perfectly applied lipstick curved into what might have been called a smile, if smiles could contain that much coldness. "Gentlemen, please," came a voice from seat 3B. Judge Patricia Kellner set down her legal briefs and looked over her reading glasses. "I've been observing this situation, and I see no evidence of disruptive behavior from this passenger. Perhaps we could, ma'am, please remain seated." Officer Santos interrupted. "This is a security matter. I am a federal appellate judge, and I'm telling you that what I'm witnessing appears to be discrimination, not security." Santos ignored her completely. His focus locked on Damon. In his 10 years of airport security, he had learned to sort people into categories: compliant or non-compliant, cooperative or problem. The man in seat 1A had already been categorized. Victoria stepped closer to the officers, lowering her voice but speaking loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "He became aggressive when asked to move officers. He threatened me personally. I felt unsafe. It was a masterful performance delivered with the kind of practiced vulnerability that had served her well throughout her career. Her voice carried just the right tremor, her posture suggested just enough fear, and her timing was perfect." Isabella Rodriguez, still standing near the galley, felt her stomach clench. She had witnessed the entire interaction, and aggressive was the last word she would use to describe the passenger in 1A. He had been calm, polite, and reasonable, but she was a junior flight attendant, and Victoria was her supervisor. Speaking up meant career suicide. "Ma'am," Officer Mitchell said to Victoria, "did he make any specific threats?" "He said I would regret this for the rest of my career," Victoria replied, her voice breaking slightly on the word regret. "He looked at me in a way that made me fear for my safety." David Park, the CNN correspondent in seat 3A, was recording everything discreetly with his phone. His journalist instincts were screaming that this was bigger than a simple seating dispute. The body language, the power dynamics, the coded language, this was a story that would matter. Damon remained perfectly still, his hands visible, his voice calm. "Officers, I strongly suggest you verify my identity before proceeding. A simple phone call to your supervisor would clarify this situation." "Your identity doesn't matter," Santos replied. "Crew wants you off, you get off. That's how aviation security works." "It matters more than you know," Damon said quietly. "And it will matter to your supervisor, your department head, and your pension fund." The words weren't delivered as a threat. They carried the quiet certainty of someone who understood exactly how power worked, how systems operated, and how careers ended. Chase Whitmore, now comfortably settled in seat 2A with a fresh champagne, was thoroughly enjoying the show. "Officers, this guy thinks he can buy his way out of anything. Some people need to learn that money doesn't make you special." Margaret Foster, the retired State Department official, had seen enough international incidents to recognize the warning signs. "Young man," she said to Chase, "I would suggest you stop talking immediately. This situation is about to become very complicated for everyone involved." "Complicated how?" Chase laughed. "This is simple. Wrong passenger, wrong seat case, closed." Victoria saw an opportunity to strengthen her narrative. Officers, he also claimed he could afford this seat, but his behavior suggests otherwise. I believe there may have been payment fraud involved. The accusation hung in the cabin air like a lit match near gasoline. Every passenger understood the implication a black man couldn't legitimately afford a $15,000 seat. Judge Kellner stood up, her voice carrying the authority of 20 years on the federal bench. Officers, I am ordering you to stop this illegal detention immediately. This passenger has committed no crime, violated no regulation, and posed no threat. What you're witnessing is textbook discrimination. Judge, please stay out of this, Santos warned. I cannot stay out of civil rights violations occurring in my presence. The cabin was now divided into camps passengers who understood they were witnessing injustice, crew members caught between policy and conscience, and officers who had committed too far to back down. In the middle of it all, Damon Richardson sat quietly, his phone in his hand, his finger hovering over a contact that would change everything. Last chance, Santos said. Stand up voluntarily, or we remove you by force. Damon looked up at the officer with the kind of steady gaze that made billion-dollar mergers and hostile takeovers possible. Officer Santos, he said, reading the name tag in about 60 seconds. You're going to wish you had taken my advice about making a phone call. Time's up, Santos said, reaching for Damon's arm. That was when Damon made the call. His finger pressed a speed dial number that connected him directly to Arthur Blackwell, senior partner at Blackwell Morrison & Associates, the most feared corporate litigation firm on the East Coast. Arthur Damon said calmly, even as Santos grabbed his wrist, "It's time to execute the Pinnacle acquisition. Today. Full hostile takeover." The line was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Damon, that's a $3.2 billion acquisition. I'm aware of the price. I want to own this airline in 6 hours. May I ask why the sudden urgency I'm being physically removed from their aircraft for the crime of sitting while black? Another pause. I'll make the calls. How public do you want this completely? I want them to understand that actions have consequences. Victoria, who had been basking in her victory, suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. Something about the passenger's phone conversation wasn't right. He was too calm, too specific, too comfortable with numbers that seemed impossibly large. Officer Santos tightened his grip on Damon's wrist. Hang up the phone, sir. Arthur, I need to go. They're about to arrest me for demanding the seat I paid for. Document everything. Already in motion. The wolves are being unleashed. Damon ended the call and looked up at Santos. Officer, you have just participated in the most expensive discrimination incident in aviation history. I hope it was worth it. Santos jerked him to his feet. Damon's laptop sliding onto the cabin floor. You can tell your lawyer all about it from county lockup. But as they began to force Damon toward the aisle, Jake Morrison's live stream was exploding across social media. His 50,000 followers had become 200,000 in the past 10 minutes, and the numbers were climbing exponentially. The hashtag Flight 847 was beginning to trend. Major news outlets were picking up the story. And in a corporate law office in Manhattan, Arthur Blackwell was activating the most powerful financial weapon in the business world, a man with unlimited resources and a commitment to absolute justice. Victoria smoothed her uniform and checked her reflection in the galley mirror. Everything was perfect. Everything was under control. She had no idea that her career had just ended. Chase raised his champagne glass in celebration. He had no idea that his trust fund was about to become evidence in a federal discrimination lawsuit. Officer Santos felt the satisfaction of a job well done. He had no idea that his pension was evaporating with each step toward the aircraft door. And Damon Richardson, as they dragged him down the aisle, was already calculating the exact cost of their assumptions. The revolution had begun. Let go of me. This is wrong. The voice came from seat 4C, where Dr. Maria Gonzalez, a pediatric surgeon, was standing and pointing her phone at the officers. Her medical training had taught her to recognize when force became excessive, and she was watching it happen in real time. Officer Santos ignored her completely, his grip on Damon's arm tight enough to leave bruises. Officer Mitchell grabbed Damon's other arm, and together they began to force him toward the aircraft door. The expensive Tom Ford suit jacket stretched and tore at the shoulder seam, the sound of ripping fabric echoing through the cabin like a gunshot. "This is police brutality on a commercial aircraft," Jake Morrison said into his live stream, his voice shaking with adrenaline. 250,000 people are watching this happen right now. This man has done nothing wrong. Damon didn't resist. His years building a business empire had taught him the value of strategic restraint. He knew that every second of this incident was being recorded. Every moment of unnecessary force was building his case, and every witness was another nail in Pinnacle Airline's corporate coffin. But his physical compliance only seemed to encourage the officers to use more force. "Stop resisting," Santos barked, even though Damon's hands were clearly visible and he was walking voluntarily. "I'm not resisting anything," Damon replied calmly. "I'm complying with your illegal detention so that my lawyers will have clear video evidence of civil rights violations." His briefcase hit the cabin floor, scattering merger documents worth $800 million across the premium carpet. The Mont Blanc pen that had belonged to his grandfather rolled under seat 2B, a small piece of family history lost in the chaos of institutional prejudice. Victoria followed behind the officers, her satisfaction growing with each step. She had handled the situation perfectly, maintained order in her cabin, and supported the passenger who mattered. Her 15 years with Pinnacle Airlines had taught her how to manage difficult situations, and this was exactly what her training manual recommended. Ma'am Isabella Rodriguez called out, her voice barely audible. "This isn't right. You know this isn't right." Victoria turned back to face the younger woman with ice-cold authority. "Isabella, if you're not comfortable with crew decisions, perhaps you should consider a different career path. Some situations require firm leadership." Judge Kellner was now standing in the aisle, her federal authority commanding attention even from armed officers. "Officers Santos and Mitchell, I am ordering you to release this passenger immediately. You are violating his civil rights under federal law. Judge, sit down or you'll be removed too." Santos replied, his voice carrying the arrogance of someone drunk on temporary power. "I am a sitting federal appellate judge. You cannot remove me for observing civil rights violations." "Watch me," Santos said. The exchange was captured by 7 different phones uploaded to 4 social media platforms and already being analyzed by law students at Stanford who were watching Jake's live stream in their constitutional law class. Margaret Foster, her diplomatic instincts in overdrive, tried a different approach. "Officers, this incident is being recorded by multiple passengers and broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of people. Perhaps we should pause and consider the broader implications." "The only implication," Officer Mitchell said, "is that passengers need to follow crew instructions. Even illegal instructions," David Park asked his CNN credentials, giving his words additional weight. "Especially illegal instructions," Santos replied, apparently unaware that he had just admitted to enforcing illegal orders. Damon's feet barely touched the ground as they dragged him toward the aircraft door. His Patek Philippe watch, worth more than both officers' annual salaries combined, caught the cabin lighting as his wrist was twisted behind his back. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice still unnaturally calm, "you're about to become the most famous security officers in aviation history. I hope you're prepared for that level of scrutiny." Chase Whitmore was recording everything on his own phone, not out of concern for justice, but because he wanted to remember his victory. "This is what happens when people forget their place," he said to his social media followers. Finally, some accountability. His words were being recorded by passengers around him, and within hours they would become evidence in multiple lawsuits. Dr. Gonzalez moved closer to the action, her medical training overriding her concern for personal safety. Officers, this man appears to have a medical condition that could be exacerbated by stress. I'm a physician, and I'm recommending you release him immediately. Damon didn't have a medical condition, but he appreciated the doctor's attempt to de-escalate the situation. Thank you, doctor, but I'm fine. I want everyone to witness exactly what Pinnacle Airlines considers appropriate passenger treatment. As they reached the aircraft door, something unexpected happened. The captain, Robert Hayes, stepped out of the cockpit and blocked their path. "Officers, wait," Hayes said. "I need to understand what's happening here." Victoria rushed forward. "Captain, this passenger was disrupting first-class, threatening crew members and refusing lawful orders. I requested his removal for the safety of other passengers." Captain Hayes looked at Damon, then at the officers, then at the cabin full of passengers recording everything. His 20 years of experience told him something wasn't right about this situation. "Sir," he said to Damon, "were you threatening anyone?" "Captain, I was sitting in my assigned seat reading merger documents when I was told to move to accommodate a late passenger. When I declined, I was accused of fraud, threatened with arrest, and now I'm being physically removed despite committing no crime and violating no regulation." Hayes looked at Victoria. "Did you check his boarding pass?" "Yes, sir. But Mr. Whitmore has priority status." "Priority status doesn't override confirmed seat assignments," Hayes interrupted. "Show me the documentation that justifies this removal." Victoria's confidence wavered for the first time. She had anticipated support from the captain, not questions. "Sir, crew discretion allows for safety concerns, not passenger preference," Hayes said firmly. "Officers, release this passenger." Santos shook his head. "Captain, we're following crew instructions. The flight attendant requested removal. We're executing removal. I'm the captain of this aircraft, and I'm ordering you to release him." "Sorry, Captain. Once we begin a removal, we complete it. Airport Authority policy." Hayes realized he was watching his career implode in real time. He had supported his crew without investigating the facts, and now he couldn't stop the process he had authorized. Damon was dragged through the aircraft door, his torn jacket flapping in the jet bridge air conditioning. Behind him, the first-class cabin erupted in chaos as passengers demanded answers, threatened lawsuits, and live-streamed everything to millions of viewers worldwide. Victoria smoothed her uniform one more time and smiled. She had maintained order-supported policy and eliminated a disruptive passenger. She had no idea that in Manhattan, Arthur Blackwell was already drafting paperwork that would make this the most expensive smile in corporate history. The aircraft door closed behind them with a soft, hydraulic hiss. But the sound that followed was much louder. The roar of social media outrage, congressional phone calls, and federal agencies opening investigations. Inside the terminal security office, Damon Richardson sat in a plastic chair, his torn suit jacket across his lap, his dignity intact despite the humiliation. He pulled out his phone and made another call. "Arthur, it's done. They removed me. How long until we own them?" 4 hours and 37 minutes. "Perfect. Now let's discuss their new operational philosophy." Outside in the terminal, Pinnacle Airlines stock was already beginning to fall. Arthur, execute the acquisition. All of it. Today. Damon Richardson sat in the sterile airport security office, his $1,500 shirt wrinkled, his Tom Ford jacket torn at the shoulder, but his voice carrying the quiet authority that had built an empire. Across from him, Officer Santos was filling out paperwork with the methodical precision of someone who believed he had just completed routine police work. On the other end of the call, Arthur Blackwell's senior partner at the most feared corporate litigation firm in Manhattan was already pulling up files that had been prepared months ago. Richardson Dynamics had been watching Pinnacle Airlines as a potential acquisition target, analyzing their routes, their infrastructure, their market position. What they hadn't expected was a personal motivation to accelerate the timeline. "Damon," That's a $3.2 billion hostile takeover. Arthur said, his voice carrying across the secure line. Are you certain you want to move this quickly? I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Damon replied. I want to own their company before their stock market closes today. I want their board of directors to understand that discriminating against their customers has consequences. In the background, Damon could hear Arthur's fingers flying across his keyboard, accessing war room protocols that most companies never wanted to experience. Blackwell Morrison and Associates specialized in corporate acquisitions that happened too fast for the target company to defend against, and they were the best in the business at turning money into power overnight. Sir Officer Santos said, looking up from his paperwork, no phone calls until processing is complete. Damon looked at the officer with the kind of patience usually reserved for small children who didn't understand adult concepts. Officer Santos. I'm calling my attorney to discuss the civil rights lawsuit that will end your career. Unless you'd like to add violation of legal representation to your list of federal crimes, I suggest you return to your paperwork. Santos hesitated, unsure of his authority in a situation that was rapidly expanding beyond his experience level. Arthur Damon continued. What's our current cash position? Richardson. Dynamics has $4.8 billion in liquid assets, plus credit lines worth another $6 billion. More than enough to acquire Pinnacle and transform them into whatever you envision. Through the security office window, Damon could see the gate area where Flight 847 was still parked. Passengers were deplaning their vacation and business plans disrupted by the incident. Some were already on their phones with lawyers. Others were posting detailed accounts to social media. The incident was spreading across the internet like wildfire, and Pinnacle's stock price was beginning to reflect the damage. What's their current market capitalization? Damon asked. $2.9 billion as of market close yesterday, but the stock is down 18% in after-hours trading. Social media is destroying their reputation in real time. Damon smiled, but there was no humor in it. Perfect. Fear makes acquisitions more affordable. Officer Santos looked up again, this time with growing concern. He was beginning to understand that the passenger he had arrested might not be who he appeared to be. The numbers being discussed were larger than his department's annual budget, and the casual way they were being discussed suggested resources beyond his comprehension. Sir, what exactly do you do for a living? Santos asked. I build technology platforms that process 40% of global e-commerce, Damon replied without taking his attention away from the call. I employ 38,000 people across 6 continents, and as of today, I'm apparently in the airline business. Santos felt his stomach drop. You're serious, officer. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. On the phone, Arthur was already coordinating with investment banks, securities attorneys, and federal regulators who would oversee the acquisition. Damon, I need authorization to begin. Once we start this process, it becomes very public very quickly. Full authorization. I want every financial news network to understand that Pinnacle Airlines is about to experience a complete change in ownership and philosophy. And what should I tell the media about your motivation? Damon looked through the window at the aircraft that had been his transportation an hour ago and would be his property within 6 hours. Tell them that customer service is about to become a priority at Pinnacle Airlines. Tell them that discrimination is expensive. And tell them that the new owner has very strong opinions about treating passengers with dignity. Arthur's excitement was audible even over the secure line. This is going to be beautiful, Damon. Absolutely beautiful. Arthur, one more thing. I want Victoria Ashworth Chase Whitmore, Captain Hayes and officers Santos and Mitchell, to understand that their actions have consequences, legal consequences, career consequences, financial consequences. I'll have papers filed within 2 hours. Civil rights violations, conspiracy to commit discrimination, violation of federal transportation law, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We're going to destroy them individually and collectively. Officer Mitchell entered the security office with a clipboard and a growing sense that he had made a terrible mistake. Sir, we need you to sign this incident report. Damon read the document carefully, noting each inaccuracy, each misstatement, each piece of evidence that would support his lawsuit. Officer Mitchell, are you aware that filing false reports is a federal crime? The report is accurate, sir. The report states that I was disruptive and threatening. Do you have evidence of disruptive behavior? Mitchell looked at Santos for support, but Santos was staring at his paperwork with the expression of someone watching his career end. You refused crew instructions, sir. I declined to give up my legitimately purchased seat to accommodate another passenger's preference. That's not illegal, officer. That's capitalism. Damon signed the report but added a note. Passenger disputes all allegations and reserves all legal rights under federal civil rights law. His phone rang. Arthur calling back. Damon, it's done. Richardson Dynamics is now the majority shareholder of Pinnacle Airlines, effective immediately. The security office went completely quiet. Santos and Mitchell stared at their prisoner who had just become their new boss's boss. Arthur, what's the first order of business for our new airline personnel changes? Extensive personnel changes. Perfect. Officer Santos. Officer Mitchell, you've just arrested the majority owner of the airline you were defending. I hope you enjoyed your careers in airport security. Both officers looked like they had been hit by lightning. Damon stood up, straightening his torn jacket. Gentlemen, I believe your supervisor is about to receive some very interesting phone calls. I suggest you prepare for early retirement. He walked toward the door of the security office, no longer a detained passenger but a businessman who had just acquired a company out of spite and would transform it into something better. Where are you going, sir? Santos called out desperately. Back to my airplane, Damon replied. I have a business to run. The call came at 4:47 p.m. Eastern Time, just as Pinnacle Airlines CEO Harrison Ford was reviewing quarterly profit reports in his corner office overlooking LaGuardia Airport. His assistant Patricia knocked twice before entering with the expression of someone delivering terminal diagnosis results. Mr. Ford, you need to take this call immediately. It's the Securities and Exchange Commission. Ford's blood pressure spiked as he lifted the receiver. SEC calls were never good news, but SEC calls at the end of trading days were apocalyptic. Harrison Ford speaking. Mr. Ford, this is Sarah Martinez from SEC Corporate Oversight. Are you aware that Richardson Dynamics has just filed acquisition paperwork for 51% of your outstanding shares? Ford's hand went numb. The receiver nearly slipped from his grasp. That's impossible. We would have been notified of any hostile takeover attempt. Mr. Ford, the filing was completed 17 minutes ago. Richardson Dynamics is claiming majority control of Pinnacle Airlines effective immediately. They're also alleging civil rights violations as motivation for the acquisition. Civil rights violations? What are you talking about? Apparently, one of your flight crews physically removed a passenger from first class this afternoon. The passenger was Damon Richardson, CEO of Richardson Dynamics. The incident was live-streamed to over 2 million viewers. Ford felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. He had built Pinnacle Airlines over 25 years, turning a regional carrier into a national powerhouse, and apparently it had just been purchased by a passenger his crew had arrested. Mr. Ford, are you there? Yes, I'm here. What are our options? Frankly, sir, you don't have any. Richardson. Dynamics has sufficient liquid assets to complete the purchase. The acquisition is legal, properly documented, and financially sound. As of market close today, you report to Damon Richardson. Ford hung up the phone and immediately called down to operations. Get me the crew manifest for Flight 847 this afternoon. Now. While Ford was learning that his company no longer belonged to him, Victoria Ashworth was in the Pinnacle Airlines crew lounge at LAX regaling other flight attendants with her victory story. You should have seen him. she said, touching up her lipstick in the mirror. Entitled passenger thinking he could intimidate me into giving him special treatment. I had security remove him in handcuffs. Her colleague, Jennifer Walsh, was scrolling through her phone with growing alarm. Victoria, are you talking about the Flight 847 incident? Yes, why? Because it's trending on every social media platform. Hashtag Justice 847. Hashtag Airline Discrimination. Hashtag Dignitary Abuse. And Victoria, the passenger wasn't just anyone. He was Damon Richardson. Victoria's lipstick paused halfway to her mouth. Who's Damon Richardson? Jennifer turned her phone screen toward Victoria. The Forbes profile photo showed the same man she had ordered removed from first class, but the caption read, Damon Richardson, tech visionary billionaire entrepreneur and CEO of Richardson Dynamics. Victoria's face went white. That's impossible. He was wearing jeans when he boarded. Victoria, he's worth $4.6 billion. He owns Richardson Dynamics, and according to breaking news, he just bought our airline. The lipstick fell from Victoria's hand, clattering across the tile floor like her career prospects. At LAX Security Headquarters, Chief of Operations Robert Martinez was watching the incident video for the 7th time, each viewing making his headache worse. His 2 officers had arrested a billionaire CEO for the crime of sitting in a seat he had purchased, and the entire incident was documented in high definition from 7 different angles. Santos Mitchell, my office. Now. The 2 officers entered like condemned men walking to execution. Explain to me, Martinez said slowly, how you managed to arrest the CEO of a $4 billion company for sitting in his assigned seat. Chief? The flight attendant said he was disruptive, Santos replied weakly. Disruptive? How I've watched the video. The man never raised his voice, never made threats, never moved from his seat. You dragged him off the plane for being black in first class. That's exactly what it was. Martinez interrupted. And now the Department of Justice is opening a civil rights investigation. The FBI wants to interview both of you. And apparently Mr. Richardson now owns the airline you were defending. Mitchell looked like he might vomit. Chief, what does this mean for us? It means you're suspended without pay pending federal investigation. It means your careers are over. And it means this department is about to face the most expensive lawsuit in aviation security history. Meanwhile, in Terminal 4, Chase Whitmore was enjoying a delayed victory celebration at the airport bar. His Instagram story was filled with videos of troublemaker removal, and he was basking in the attention from his social media followers. His phone rang. His father. Chase. What the hell did you do, Dad? I just had security remove some guy who was trying to steal my seat. It was handled perfectly. You idiot. That guy was Damon Richardson. He just bought Pinnacle Airlines. The board is in emergency session and they're demanding your head. Chase's champagne glass slipped from his hand. Dad, you're on the board. You can fix this. I'm no longer on any board. I've been removed. Our family's investment in Pinnacle is worthless. And Chase, there are federal investigators looking for you. Dad, don't call me. Get a lawyer. And Chase, don't ever use the Whitmore name in public again. The line went dead. Back in the security office, Damon Richardson was making his final call of the day. Arthur, I want you to schedule a press conference for tomorrow morning. New York Federal Plaza, 10 a.m. What's the message? Damon. The message is simple. Discrimination is expensive. Dignity is profitable. And Pinnacle Airlines is about to become the most respectful airline in American history. And the personnel changes Victoria Ashworth, Chase, Whitmore, Captain Hayes, and Officers Santos and Mitchell will never work in aviation again. I want their terminations to be public documented and permanent. What about the broader implications? Damon looked out the window at the Pinnacle aircraft that was now his property. Arthur, we're not just buying an airline. We're changing an industry. Every carrier in America is going to understand that treating passengers like criminals has consequences. As the sun set over Los Angeles International Airport, the aviation industry was already beginning to change. Other airlines were reviewing their discrimination policies. Flight attendants were receiving emergency training updates. Security companies were revising their procedures. And Damon Richardson was planning the transformation of an entire industry, one policy at a time. The revolution had begun with a single seat. It would end with significant change across American aviation. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, discrimination is not a business model. Arthur Blackwell stood before the federal courthouse in Los Angeles, his silver hair catching the morning sunlight, his $1,000 suit tailored to perfection. Behind him, the courthouse steps were packed with reporters from every major news network in America. This had become more than a lawsuit. It had become a referendum on dignity in commercial aviation. 6 months had passed since the Flight 847 incident, and the legal machinery that Damon Richardson had set in motion was now running at full capacity. Federal prosecutors had filed criminal charges. The Department of Justice had opened a pattern and practice investigation. And Arthur Blackwell was about to destroy 5 careers with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a shark. Today we will prove that Victoria Ashworth Chase Whitmore, Captain Robert Hayes, and officers Miguel Santos and James Mitchell conspired to violate the civil rights of Damon Richardson. Not because he committed a crime, not because he posed a threat, but because they didn't believe a black man belonged in first class. In the courtroom, Victoria Ashworth sat at the defendant's table, her once perfect appearance now showing the strain of 6 months without income, without prospects, and without the confidence that had once made her untouchable. Her legal aid attorney looked overwhelmed by the resources arrayed against them. The transformation of Pinnacle Airlines had been swift and absolute. Within 24 hours of the acquisition, Damon had fired the entire executive team, implemented new anti-discrimination policies, and announced the most comprehensive employee retraining program in aviation history. The airline had been renamed Dignity Air with the slogan, "Respect in every mile," painted on every aircraft in the fleet. Victoria's termination had been public documented and permanent. Blacklisted from the aviation industry, unable to find employment in customer service, and facing legal bills that would bankrupt her, she had watched her life collapse in real time. "Your Honor," Arthur continued, "the evidence will show that Ms. Ashworth made her decision based solely on racial assumptions. She saw a black passenger and automatically assumed he didn't belong in first class. When presented with a legitimate boarding pass, she invented a system error. When offered factual evidence, she chose to support privilege over policy." The jury, 6 women and 6 men from diverse backgrounds, listened with the kind of attention that suggested they understood the broader implications of this case. This wasn't just about one incident on one flight. This was about every time they had been treated differently, dismissed unfairly, or judged by their appearance, rather than their merit. Chase Whitmore looked even worse than Victoria. His father had disowned him publicly, his trust fund had been frozen pending the outcome of criminal proceedings, and his social media accounts had become monuments to entitled privilege. The videos he had posted celebrating Damon's removal were now evidence in federal court, played repeatedly for juries who watched his gleeful participation in discrimination. Captain Hayes sat separately, his 20-year career destroyed by 5 minutes of poor judgment. He had supported his crew without investigating facts, escalated a situation that could have been resolved with simple verification, and allowed federal crimes to occur on his aircraft. The Federal Aviation Administration had revoked his license permanently. Officers Santos and Mitchell faced the most serious charges: conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, excessive force, and filing false police reports. Both men had already been terminated by airport authority and were facing potential prison time. Arthur approached the jury box with the confidence of someone who had never lost a civil rights case. Members of the jury, you will see video evidence from 7 different angles. You will hear testimony from federal judges, CNN correspondents, and medical doctors who witnessed these violations. You will review the defendant's own words captured on audio and video demonstrating clear racial bias and discriminatory intent. He gestured toward Damon, who sat in the gallery wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. Mr. Richardson didn't need to be a billionaire to deserve respect. He didn't need to be a CEO to deserve dignity. He deserved proper treatment simply because he was a human being who had purchased a seat on a commercial aircraft. The defendant stole that dignity, violated his rights, and humiliated him in front of millions of witnesses. Victoria's attorney, overwhelmed by the evidence and the resources arrayed against his client, could only manage weak objections and procedural delays. The facts were undeniable. The video evidence was damning, and the pattern of discriminatory behavior was clear. The trial lasted 3 weeks, during which the entire aviation industry watched nervously. Other airlines settled discrimination cases quietly, hoping to avoid similar scrutiny. Flight attendant training programs were overhauled. Security procedures were revised. The entire culture of commercial aviation was changing because one man had refused to accept injustice. When Arthur presented his closing argument, he spoke directly to the broader implications of the case. This trial is about more than compensation for Mr. Richardson. It's about establishing that discrimination has consequences. Real consequences. Career-ending consequences. Financially devastating consequences. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the courtroom. The defendants thought they were dealing with just another passenger who would accept injustice quietly. They discovered they were wrong. Dead wrong. And their wrongness cost them everything. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. "We find for the plaintiff on all counts," the foreman announced. "We award compensatory damages of $50 million and punitive damages of $200 million. Victoria Ashworth began crying silently at the defendant's table. Chase Whitmore stared at the floor in shock. The officers looked like men who had just learned their appeals were denied. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom. It was in the transformation that had already occurred throughout the industry. Dignity Air had become the most respected airline in America within 6 months. Customer satisfaction ratings were unprecedented. Employee morale had skyrocketed under leadership that treated staff and passengers with equal respect. The company's value had increased by 40% since the acquisition. Other airlines had implemented similar reforms, terrified of facing their own Damon Richardson moment. Discrimination complaints were down 70% industry-wide. Training programs emphasized dignity and respect over compliance and authority. As the courtroom cleared, Arthur approached Damon with the satisfaction of a warrior who had just won a righteous war. "It's finished," Arthur said. "Complete victory on all fronts." "No," Damon replied, watching the defendants file out of the courtroom toward uncertain futures. "It's just beginning. This case was about the past. Now we build the future." Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded Damon as he made his way to a waiting car. "Mr. Richardson, what's next for Dignity Air?" "We're expanding," Damon replied. "International routes, competitive pricing, and the highest service standards in the industry. We're proving that treating people with respect is not just morally right, it's profitable. Any message for other airlines?" Damon paused at the car door, looking back at the courthouse where justice had just been served. Dignity isn't optional. Respect isn't negotiable. And discrimination is a luxury no business can afford. As the car pulled away, the transformation of American aviation continued. One policy at a time. One flight at a time. One passenger at a time. 1 year later, Terminal 4 at Los Angeles International Airport buzzed with the familiar energy of international travel, but something fundamental had changed. The Dignity Air check-in counters were surrounded by passengers who looked genuinely happy to be flying. Their faces relaxed rather than stressed. Their interactions with staff characterized by mutual respect rather than adversarial tension. Isabella Rodriguez, now Vice President of Passenger Experience, walked through the terminal with the confidence of someone who had found her calling. At 30, she possessed the kind of natural leadership that came from understanding both sides of the service equation. Her promotion had been swift and well-deserved. She had been the only crew member on Flight 847 with the courage to speak up against discrimination, and Damon had rewarded that integrity with responsibility and authority. Ms. Rodriguez called David Kim, a tech entrepreneur heading to Seoul for a venture capital presentation. "I just wanted to thank you personally. Flying used to be something I endured. Now it's actually pleasant." Isabella smiled, the kind of genuine expression that had become standard throughout Dignity Air's operation. "That's exactly what we're trying to achieve, Mr. Kim. Have a wonderful flight." The transformation had been comprehensive and swift. Every employee had undergone intensive retraining focused on dignity, respect, and cultural sensitivity. The old guard supervisors who couldn't adapt to treating passengers as valued customers, rather than necessary nuisances, had been replaced with people who understood that excellent service was both morally right and financially smart. The physical changes were equally dramatic. The aircraft's interiors had been redesigned with actual legroom in economy, comfortable seating throughout, and amenities that treated every passenger as someone worth impressing. The old class-based hierarchy still existed. First class, business class, economy, but the gap in treatment had narrowed significantly. Flight attendants were trained to address passengers by name whenever possible to anticipate needs rather than react to complaints, and to resolve conflicts with creativity and empathy rather than authority and rules. The financial results had been extraordinary. Dignity Air had become the most profitable airline in American aviation within 8 months of the acquisition. Customer loyalty was unprecedented. Repeat booking rates were 40% higher than industry average. Employee satisfaction surveys showed the highest ratings in the industry. More importantly, the ripple effects had transformed the entire sector. American Airlines had implemented the Dignity Protocol comprehensive anti-discrimination training and passenger advocacy programs. Delta had hired cultural sensitivity consultants and revised their crew training manuals. United had created passenger liaison positions and anonymous reporting systems for discrimination complaints. Southwest had begun promoting their Respect First policy in national advertising campaigns. JetBlue had hired away 3 senior executives from Dignity Air, hoping to replicate their culture of excellence. The industry had learned that treating passengers with dignity was not a cost center, it was a profit driver. Near Gate 47, where Flight 847 had once departed into infamy, a small brass plaque had been installed. It read, "In memory of every passenger who was treated unfairly and in commitment to every passenger who deserves better." The plaque had been Damon's idea, but he hadn't wanted his name associated with it. This wasn't about personal recognition. It was about collective commitment to change. As afternoon departed into evening, Isabella received a text message from corporate boss arriving on Flight 1847. VIP greeting requested. She smiled at the irony of the flight number. Damon had specifically requested that the route be designated 1847, a daily reminder that transformation was possible. At 6:30 p.m., Damon Richardson walked through the jet bridge from New York, his travel uniform consisting of dark jeans, a simple white shirt, and the kind of understated confidence that no longer needed expensive suits to command respect. "Welcome home, Mr. Richardson," Isabella said, extending her hand. "Thank you, Isabella. And please, it's just Damon. How are the passenger satisfaction numbers this month? 97% positive ratings. the highest in our industry. Damon nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose vision had become reality. What about employee retention 94% annually? People don't want to leave jobs where they feel valued and empowered. They walked through the terminal together past passengers who were smiling staff members who were engaged and systems that actually worked efficiently. The transformation was complete, but the mission continued daily. Isabella, I have an announcement to make tomorrow. We're expanding internationally. London, Tokyo, Sydney. We're going to show the world that American aviation has learned how to treat passengers properly. That's wonderful news. How many new routes? 12, initially 36, within 2 years. And Isabella, I want you to oversee the international expansion. You understand what we're trying to accomplish better than anyone. Isabella stopped walking, overwhelmed by the opportunity and the trust it represented. Damon, I was a junior flight attendant 18 months ago, and you had the courage to speak truth when everyone else chose silence. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need to change global aviation. As they reached the terminal exit, Damon paused to look back at the bustling departure gates. Passengers moved with ease. Staff members smiled genuinely, and the entire environment hummed with positive energy. You know what I'm most proud of? He asked. The profits, the passenger ratings, the industry transformation. The fact that no other passenger will experience what I experienced on Flight 847. That kind of dignity theft is now financially impossible in American aviation. Outside, the California sun was setting over LAX, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Aircraft from dozens of airlines taxied toward runways, their passengers protected by policies that had emerged from one man's refusal to accept injustice. The revolution that had begun in Seat 1A had transformed an entire industry, and tomorrow it would begin transforming the world. 6 months later, Damon Richardson stood in the same spot where his journey had begun, Seat 1A, on what was now Dignity Air Flight 1847, the same route from Los Angeles to New York that had changed everything. But this morning was different. This morning he wasn't traveling alone. Beside him, in Seat 1B, sat Marcus Johnson, an 11-year-old boy from Oakland whose single mother worked 2 jobs to keep their family afloat. Marcus was part of the Richardson Foundation's Wings of Opportunity program, which provided first-class travel experiences to children who had never been on an airplane. Mr. Richardson, Marcus whispered, his eyes wide as he looked around the first-class cabin. Is this really all for me? Damon smiled, remembering his own first business trip 30 years ago when he had pressed his face against the window of a Greyhound bus and dreamed of someday flying. It's all for you, Marcus. And more importantly, you belong here. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. The flight attendant approaching their seats was David Martinez, a former junior steward who had witnessed the original incident and had since been promoted to senior crew leadership. His testimony during the trial had helped secure justice, and his commitment to the new culture had made him a symbol of transformation within the company. Good morning, Mr. Richardson, and welcome aboard, Marcus. I'm David, and I'll be taking care of both of you today. Marcus, is this your first time in first class? Marcus nodded, speechless. Well, then we'll make sure it's perfect, Mr. Richardson. Would you like your usual? Just water, David? And Marcus? What would you like? I can have anything, Marcus asked, his voice filled with wonder. Anything you want, Damon confirmed. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Damon reflected on the transformation that had rippled outward from this seat, this route, this moment of injustice that had become a catalyst for industry-wide change. Victoria Ashworth was now working as a clerk at a discount electronics store in Riverside. Her aviation career permanently ended, her confidence permanently shattered. The federal conviction had made her unemployable in any customer-facing industry, and she spent her days surrounded by the consequences of her choices. Chase Whitmore had moved to Montana where his notoriety hadn't followed him. Working construction for the first time in his life, he had discovered humility the hard way. His trust fund remained frozen. His family connections severed his social media presence, a cautionary tale studied in business ethics courses. Officers Santos and Mitchell had served 8-month sentences in federal prison and were now working security at a shopping mall their law enforcement careers permanently ended. Every day they walked past travelers heading to airports they could no longer access professionally. Captain Hayes had moved to rural Oregon, where he taught flying lessons to teenage pilots who would never know his history. The humiliation had aged him a decade in 2 years, but he had found peace in honest work and redemption through teaching others to be better than he had been. But Damon preferred to focus on the positive transformations. Isabella Rodriguez was now Executive Vice President of Global Operations, overseeing Dignity Air's expansion into Europe and Asia. Judge Patricia Kellner had written a landmark decision establishing passenger rights in commercial aviation. David Park had won a Pulitzer Prize for his investigative series on discrimination in transportation. The industry itself had been fundamentally altered. Passenger complaints about discriminatory treatment had dropped by 85% across all major airlines. Employee training programs emphasized dignity and respect as core business principles. Customer satisfaction ratings had reached historic highs industry-wide. Other businesses had taken notice. Hotels, restaurants, retail chains, entire sectors had adopted dignity-first policies, understanding that respect was both morally imperative and financially profitable. As Flight 1847 reached cruising altitude, Marcus pressed his face against the window, watching the country spread below like a map of infinite possibility. "Mr. Richardson," he said quietly, "my mom told me you used to be poor like us. Is that true?" "It's true, Marcus. I grew up in Oakland just like you. My grandfather worked 3 jobs. My mother cleaned houses. We didn't have money, but we had dreams. And now you own an airline. Now I own an airline. But more importantly, I learned something that I want you to remember. Your dignity doesn't depend on other people's permission. You belong anywhere your character and effort can take you." Marcus nodded solemnly, processing wisdom that would shape his understanding of possibility. As the aircraft began its descent into New York, Damon thought about the speech he would give that afternoon to the United Nations Committee on Human Rights. Dignity Air's transformation had become a case study in corporate responsibility, and he had been invited to address the global community about dignity, justice, and the power of institutional change. But the real victory wasn't in the recognition or the profits. It was in the knowledge that no other passenger would experience the humiliation he had endured. The system had been changed at its foundation, and that change would protect millions of travelers for decades to come. "Mr. Richardson," Marcus said as the plane touched down at JFK, "when I grow up, I want to build something important like you did. What do you want to build?" "Marcus?" The 11-year-old looked thoughtful for a moment. "I want to build a world where nobody gets treated badly just because of how they look." Damon smiled, recognizing in the young boy's words the same determination that had driven his own journey from poverty to power. "Then you will," he said, "and I'll help you." As they walked off the aircraft together, the billionaire and the boy from Oakland, Damon understood that this was how real change happened. Not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through individual moments of courage that inspired others to demand better. True power wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was about building a world where the next person didn't need to be extraordinary to be treated with dignity. Sometimes it takes one call to change everything, but it takes a lifetime of character to be worthy of making that call. The transformation was complete, the revolution continued, and dignity had finally found a permanent seat at the table of American aviation. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or treated like you didn't belong, remember Damon Richardson's story. Your dignity doesn't require anyone else's permission. Your worth isn't determined by other people's assumptions. And sometimes the best response to injustice is building something so much better that discrimination becomes not just wrong, but obsolete. True change happens when we refuse to accept injustice as normal, when we demand better from institutions, and when we use our success to lift others up. Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about transformation. Stories like this remind us that one person's courage to stand up can change entire industries. If this story inspired you, hit that like button to help it reach more people who need to hear this message. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of justice, transformation, and the power of never backing down from what's right. And please share this video with someone who needs to remember that their dignity matters no matter where they sit on the airplane of life. Your engagement helps us bring you more stories that matter. What would you have done in Damon's situation? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, remember, respect is not optional, dignity is not negotiable, and justice delayed is not justice denied when you have the power to make change happen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.